Hello, welcome to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I am your host as always, Professor Prime. And welcome to Super Ultra Mega Math History, Phenomenal Figures, the series where I talk about different people in math that I find interesting, that I find prolific, that I find tell a tale, and it like a really good one, like that also may have contributed to not only math but society as a whole. And oftentimes these people did a lot of things outside of math, and I think all of that is interesting. And I usually talk about them in varying ways. I talk about them in a respectful way as needed, in a chilled out way as needed, or in an amused way as needed, or just an amazed way as well. And so to get into it, with this particular video, I'm going to talk about Paul Erdos. So who was Erdos? Well, he was a mathematician that came along in the early 1900s and actually made it through most of it. And I think that's pretty cool because he died the late 90s. Now, he lived an interesting life. Erdos was a Hungarian mathematician that published 1,500 papers, whether he wrote them directly or co-wrote them with other people. And Erdos had over 500 collaborators, believing that math was a social activity. And we're going to get more into that as we go forward. I think it's worth mentioning that he had an interesting life. And for the math part, one of his focal points wasn't just discovering new areas and developing those said new areas, but developing areas where people got stumped. He would often focus on problems that hadn't been solved yet, and I feel like that opens up a lot of different avenues. And like I said, he believed math to be a social activity, and since he worked with so many people and so many papers, one of the things that came out of his work, besides the actual mathematical developments, was the Erdos number, which is a number that people get in relation to Erdos and how they work with him. So there's different numbers based on if you worked with him directly, or you worked with someone who worked with him, or if you worked with someone who worked with someone who worked with him, and so on and so forth. And I think that's interesting because it was a way to honor him, and I think it does a better job than initially conceived. Because I think there's an idea like, hey, we have this number and it's about him and we're honoring him in that level. But since he believed math to be such a social thing, and the Erdos number is like inherently about you know something that is social, I think that does a great job of honoring him. That being said, he had a lot of different focal points in math when it came to like the different areas, anywhere from number theory to analysis. And one of his biggest focus was on discrete math. He also did some things on like set theory. He did some things on probability theory. You name it, he's kind of been involved in it. But in addition to just the sheer volume, the sheer insane volume of material that he created with math, I think he leaves an impact once you know about him, or whether you know about him or not. I think he leaves a pretty powerful impact. And here's how: it's like he opened up the doors. I feel in a way, like in terms of collaboration. He made that more normalized, made it something like worth talking about. And his lifestyle, I think, was interesting too, like because he made it pretty late in life. You know what I mean? Not like he made it in math pretty late in life, but like he lived a long time. And despite that, like he never got married or anything, and he had his own views on that. He had his own views on religion, but that to me isn't the most interesting part. So his thing is he didn't live like most people lived. He was a nomad. He spent most of his time in his adult life going to different conferences, being a guest lecturer at different universities, and traveling. And so he didn't really have a stable residence. How it usually worked was he would go to different friends in their houses, and he would end up typically collaborating with people and kind of getting ideas from them of who to collaborate with next. So in many ways, Erdos was the ultimate couch surfer, and I think that's respectable. And so a lot of the money that he got, um, as he did his thing, as he lectured and stuff like that, a lot of the stuff that the money that he got from that was used to, fund his basic needs and to fund his traveling. And he would often donate to, causes that he considered worthy. And I think that was pretty cool. And then like he also had the idea of like Erdos problems, which were problems that were unsolved that he would like pose to different students and reward them if they got an answer or to it. And I think that's pretty cool. They're usually like pretty hard stuff, and the idea being that they're approaching it with fresh eyes, so they might not know how traditionally difficult it is, and if they aren't getting their head about it, they might be able to walk away doing something that a lot of people thought couldn't be done. And I think that's interesting in its own right too. And I remember when I first found out about Erdos, it was just like a little bit, and I found out about him when I was taking like a discrete structures class. So just very appropriate because again, like that's his major focus, even though he contributed to a lot of areas of math. But when I would really find out more information about him was when I took a history of math class because I knew about Erdos, I knew about Erdos numbers and a few other things, but we watched a documentary on him in my history of math class, like back in the day. And there's some pretty cool stuff in that. They interviewed people that were in his life and all that cool stuff. Now, this next part, I'd say like if you're older, it's not gonna really bother you, and you might find it like hilarious. If you're a kid, you might want to tune out, or if you're a parent and you have a kid, you might want to like tell them to not watch for just a second and then resume when this part is done. But that disclaimer aside, here we go. I hope you handled it accordingly. So one of the other interesting things about Erdos is this. He definitely used stimulants. He was a fan. Like later in life. So I think that's interesting. And it had gotten to the point though that a lot of his friends were concerned about him using said stimulants. It depends on like I think the source, like what he was using. But all are kind of related there. But the whole point is that yeah, he used stimulants to do his math, and his friends were super concerned. So one of his friends actually bet him. He bet him $500 that he couldn't, go a month without taking stimulants. And you know what? Erdos took him up on that bet. He went a whole month. But then you know what he did after that? After like quitting for a month? He just went back into it. Because to him, that page was blank without him taking his stimulants. But when he did, the pages were filled with math. And I think that's interesting. He had a lot of like crazy things about his life that I just find utterly fascinating. Or whether it be his views or the fact that like, he pretty openly used stimulants, and even though that's the case, he's still able to get more known for, what he did in math. And I find it fascinating because his whole thing was like he was hardcore about math and doing it to the end of his life, and spreading it out and getting people more involved in it. And when he died, it was actually after he solved like some presumably crazy geometry problem. So I think that's pretty cool. He did math up until the end. So yeah, I don't want this to get too long, but if I want to go and like sum it up real quick before I exit, Erdos was a mathematician that did his own thing. He spent his life mostly traveling to different conferences and different universities. He worked with over 500 collaborators. He published over 1,500 papers. He definitely used a fair amount of stimulants. And that kind of is what it is. And I think that actually just, it kind of makes the tale more interesting because, like, most people who might do that maybe aren't so open about it. But that being said, whether you've heard of Erdos before this video or not, his impact is felt in the math community, and I think it is kind of interesting that he maybe isn't that well known outside of it, which is a shame because he did a lot. So yeah, I hope you learned something interesting here, and I do not recommend that you go and take stimulants. But yeah, I just wanted to make that clear. But yeah, Erdos. He was a mathematician. He is a particularly social mathematician. And, you know, a lot of people don't think those things go together, but I find that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we're not stereotypes. We are people just like everyone else. And, you know, it's natural for people to socialize. So glad that Erdos did that. I do that. A lot of my friends do that too. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Professor Prime out.